Picture yourself standing outside the royal birthing chamber in Madrid, year 1661. The halls reek of incense and sweat. Candles flicker against marble columns as maids scurry past with wide eyes and bloodied towels. Behind a pair of carved oak doors, the queen's screams rise, then cut off, swallowed by silence. Every heartbeat in the palace pauses. Something has entered the world. A figure steps out. A midwife, hands dripping red, face pale as linen. No triumphant words, no smile. She stares at the nobles gathered in the corridor and murmurs, barely audible, "Something's wrong." Inside the chamber, the queen lies still. Beside her, swaddled in silk and surrounded by trembling attendants, is her son, the future king. The baby is quiet. Too quiet. His limbs hang like wet cloth. His lower jaw juts forward unnaturally. His tongue spills past his lips. His chest barely rises. He cannot feed. He does not cry. Yet nobles bow. Courtiers offer hollow congratulations. He is royal, therefore he must be perfect. But their eyes betray them. They see the truth. This child is not a beginning. He is an omen. He is the end product of a dynasty obsessed with itself. Not a child, but a warning with a pulse. And so begins the pageant. This weak, unfocused, silent infant is dressed in velvet and called a prince. Outside the room, the whispers grow. Cursed, doomed, a punishment, a cruel joke played by God. But there is no turning back. Spain must have a king, and Spain has only one bloodline left. The Habsburg name had once carried awe. Now it carried a shadow. This boy was born of a line that had twisted in on itself like roots in poisoned soil. Cousin married cousin. Uncle took niece. Generations folded tighter, spiraling into something grotesque. The blood once called sacred was now dangerous. To understand this child's fate, you must step back through the centuries. The Habsburgs worshipped purity. Foreigners were threats. Outsiders, unworthy. They married among themselves until the family tree stopped branching and began looping. A maze of faces too alike, with jaws that jutted and minds that frayed. A house where titles mattered more than health. One of his ancestors, Joanna of Austria, was already the result of decades of close kin unions. Look at her portrait, and you'll see the repetition. The same heavy chin, the same narrowed eyes. By her time, the signs were obvious. The jaw was no longer a quirk. It was a mutation. Some couldn't speak. Others couldn't chew. And still, no one dared to question the system. Disease bloomed under crowns. Madness hid behind velvet. But those in power simply looked away. The Spanish branch, by the 17th century, was so interwoven that its members shared more DNA than siblings. They lived in gold palaces, but carried bodies on the edge of failure. Minds that unraveled behind lace and embroidery. Mariana of Austria, both niece and bride to the reigning king, wasn't chosen for charm. She was selected for bloodline. Her union with Philip IV was not a love story. It was strategy. A pairing designed to reinforce the Habsburg spiral. Between them, they shared more genetic material than most parents and children. When Mariana conceived, the court rejoiced. At last, a son, an heir, the continuity of empire. But what they saw as salvation was only delay. The child within her was not a future. He was the sum of centuries of repetition, a prophecy in flesh. From his first breath, the signs were clear. He didn't scream. He didn't flail. His limbs were soft, his skin grayish and cool. When sound did come, it was wet and broken. The palace physician spoke softly of weakness, of patience, of prayers. But inside, they knew. This wasn't illness. This was inheritance. No miracle would save him. His life was not a trial. It was a conclusion, an end in royal clothing. And still, they gave him names, gave him honor, placed upon him the crown of Spain. They wrapped his brokenness in silk, pinned medals to his chest, and called him the hope of an empire. But the truth was harder to bury. He was a prophecy in skin, a boy with a mouth too swollen to speak, a throat too frail to swallow, and bones that would never carry the weight of a crown. Yet Spain had no alternative. The dynasty needed a monarch, and this fragile child was the only thread left. They gave him names: Charles II, King of Spain, Guardian of the Faith, ruler of lands from the Andes to Manila. But beneath the velvet titles was a boy who could barely hold up his own head. From the start, his body defied him. His skull was misshapen, his cranium swollen, pulsing visibly under candlelight. His tongue drooped from his mouth, his jaw hung open. He couldn't nurse, he couldn't form words. With time, nothing improved. Solid food made him gag. Soft food dribbled down his chin. Nurses kept cloths at the ready day and night. His first teeth came years late. He didn't take a step until 5. And even then, the sight of his awkward gait made courtiers avert their eyes. Still, the kingdom smiled, toasted, pretended, because to admit the truth about him would be to admit the truth about the crown itself. So they invented myths. His silence became sacred. His delays were interpreted as divine patience. His blank stares were cloaked in mystery. But in private, the lie unraveled. Tutors sighed behind closed doors. He couldn't follow lessons, couldn't write his name. Loud noises unsettled him. He flinched at candlelight. He would sit for hours, staring at nothing, running his fingers along brocade sleeves as if discovering them for the first time. He rarely responded when spoken to. When corrected, he sulked like a toddler. At times, he erupted, striking out at those around him, tearing clothes, gnawing chair legs. One ambassador wrote, without ceremony, "The king seems less a man and more a mistake survived by chance." Another was more blunt. "He will not last." And yet, he did. Not through strength, but inertia. His life became a strange form of endurance, a performance of sovereignty. His mother, Queen Mariana, ruled in all but name. She signed edicts, made alliances, used his body like a mask draped in royal fabric. When he appeared in public, slouched in golden chairs, eyes glazed, mouth sagging, his presence was enough. Enough to reassure a nation desperate to believe in continuity. But inside the palace, the smell of sickness clung to the air. Curtains stayed drawn. Priests lingered near, waiting for a last breath that refused to come. The royal rooms were soaked in perfumes to hide infection. Sheets were changed twice a day. The king had long lost control over his body. And still, the painters arrived. On canvas, his face was noble, composed, aglow. Gone were the trembling lip and unfocused eyes. His portrait smiled when he no longer could. The court needed him not only to breathe, but to breed, to extend the dynasty. Talk of marriage filled the halls, as if repetition could redeem the bloodline. But even the most hopeful knew, he wasn't a savior. He was the sum total of their decisions. As the years passed, The distinction between king and marionette blurred. He was dressed like a ruler, moved like a relic. His eyes remained vacant, his mouth slack. He sat on the throne like a flicker of memory, soft, shaking, fading. A crown sat atop a skull that had never fully formed. The court had perfected illusion, but now it wore through like old cloth. The pretense was no longer just for the people. The nobles lied to themselves. The alternative was too unbearable. The boy they called king was not a monarch. He was the visible collapse of an empire held upright by ceremony. El Escorial gleamed with waxed floors and polished brass, but the air was hollow. Every courtier rehearsed politeness. Every gesture was staged. The palace had become a theater of denial. If he sat in silence, he was contemplative. If he babbled, it was taken for mysticism. If he stared blankly, they praised his depth. Anything to avoid the truth. Anything to avoid seeing the end that already sat among them, crowned in gold. Even the artists became accomplices in the lie. Their portraits were fantasies, regal, composed, almost divine. They reimagined his face, erased the sagging jaw, corrected the hollow gaze, stiffened his posture. On canvas, he looked every inch a monarch. In reality, he resembled a man already being mourned. Foreign dignitaries came expecting glory. What they encountered was closer to nightmare. A French emissary wrote, "I cannot say what disturbs me more, the king's condition or the court's refusal to see it." Banquets were held in his name, where he drooled into silver cups and needed help to lift a spoon. Musicians performed while he stared into nothing. Once, a court jester muttered aloud, "This is a realm ruled by a corpse." By morning, he was gone. But the decay extended beyond the king. It had infected the monarchy itself. Government crumbled under rivalries and suspicion. Courtiers fought for the ear of Queen Mariana, who reigned from behind a curtain of maternal authority. Religious zealots flooded the palace, convinced Charles was a sign of divine punishment. Tales of enchantments and demons swirled through the corridors. Failed harvests and violent storms were blamed not on chance, but on the unnatural king. Some whispered that he was cursed. Others feared he was the curse. And through it all, Charles sat in the center, unmoving, unknowing, like a relic in a collapsing shrine. His days were scripted to the minute, not out of order, but necessity. Left alone, he might fall. Left with truth, he might scream. Mariana controlled access like a fortress. Who could speak to him? Who could touch him? Who could see the moments when his body failed? She reviewed his correspondence, dictated his decrees, and spoke his thoughts aloud when he could no longer find them. He had become a vessel. She, the hand that steered it. In the chapel, the prayers never ceased. Clergy begged for strength, for sanity, for a miracle. Despite seizures and silence, the court still imagined a future, still prayed for a child, for lineage, for salvation through birth. But hope soured on contact with reality. When foreign brides arrived, optimism vanished. A noblewoman from France reportedly fainted at first glance. Another refused to remove her gloves, fearful of contagion from mere presence. Yet the ceremonies went on. They bowed. They smiled. They whispered, "Long live the king," because truth would destroy everything they built. By the time Charles turned 20, whispers had become open declarations. They called him El Hechizado, the bewitched. as if magic, not ancestry, had twisted his body. His decline was impossible to hide. His jaw sagged, drool flowed unchecked. His hair fell in tufts, his skin yellowed, waxy and thin. His eyes flicked about in panic, searching for exit from a prison of flesh. Still he reigned, this deteriorating form, cloaked in royal robes, crowned in fading glory. Marriage became the next theater of hope. The court arranged a union with Marie-Louise of Orléans, niece of Louis XIV. She was 17, delicate, terrified, and unready for the burden ahead. On their wedding night, she was led to the bedchamber like a lamb to the altar. The king lay there, shivering, lost, incapable. Rumors multiplied, that he cried, that he prayed, that he stared at her until servants explained what a husband must do. Whatever truth lay behind the locked door, the result was clear. No child was conceived. Not that night. Not ever. Physicians were called. Tonics were brewed. Powdered stones, insects, exotic roots. Monks chanted. Doctors inspected. But nothing could repair the bloodline's collapse. The king was infertile. His body could not create life. And beside him, his young wife withered. Her laughter vanished. Her appetite disappeared. By 26, she was dead. The cause on paper, intestinal failure. The cause in whispers, grief. She was buried in state, and at her funeral, the king tore at his hair and wailed, inconsolable in his ruin. He begged to be laid beside her coffin. He whispered that she would wake. But within a year, the marriage bed was prepared again. This time for Maria Anna of Neuburg, sharp-tongued, politically astute, and German. She arrived with a retinue of confessors, midwives, and physicians. Her purpose was unspoken, but understood: bear a child. Yet despite the ceremonies, the silences, and the relentless expectation, the result was always the same. No heir, no future. Like the queen before her, Maria Anna began to wither. Her face grew pale, her voice quieter. She was devoured by the same invisible weight that consumed everyone near the throne. Meanwhile, the king deteriorated rapidly. By 30, he resembled an old man. His spine bent, his molars rotted and fell. He could no longer chew food. Every meal had to be crushed and spooned into his mouth, while servants muttered prayers. He wore diapers. He couldn't climb steps or speak clearly. Names escaped him. Yet the crown remained firmly in place. With no cure in sight, medicine gave way to myth. Doctors were dismissed. In their place came exorcists. The king was stripped bare, bathed in sacred water, surrounded by chanting monks. Smoke filled the air. Holy symbols burned in incense. They shouted Latin over him, accused him of sins he couldn't name. One monk declared he'd been hexed by a Moorish warlock, punishment for the sins of the Habsburg line. No one dared speak the true reason. No one said the word inbreeding. The truth was unutterable. The royal line had been breeding within itself for so long, it had birthed its own undoing. He wasn't possessed. He was the final chapter, a breathing reminder of what pride and isolation had done. Draped in gold, he was the Habsburg legacy made visible. And still, he ruled. Or was made to. He sat in the center of a collapsing court, each breath treated like a miracle. Every twitch or blink described as a blessing. Because if the king died, so too did the illusion of empire. There was no heir, no second son, no succession plan. so his decay became sacred. The court wrapped it in ritual. They transformed him into a living relic, delicate, priceless, untouchable. Mirrors were hidden from him. Servants softened their footsteps. He was told he was holy, favored, chosen by God. And perhaps he believed it. Or perhaps he had no other version of reality. When performance is all you've ever known, truth becomes the real terror. By 30, it was clear. He was dying. But how long it would take, no one knew. His body had been decaying since birth, just slow enough to preserve appearances. Like the empire, he endured not by strength, but momentum. Behind curtains, the palace became a nest of quiet panic. The same question lingered in every whisper. Who would rule after him? He had no children. His first wife died suddenly. Some said illness, others poison. And now, Maria Anna had become queen not by affection, but by bloodline. Her family was known for fertility, but not even their name could overcome centuries of genetic decline. Charles remained without an heir. The dynasty remained hollow. Out of desperation, Maria Anna called for a spiritual investigation. Monks searched his chambers. They examined the linens, the dishes, the ashes of his first wife. One theory blamed cursed chocolate. Another claimed Satan had taken root in the royal bed. And Charles believed it all. Of course he did. He had lived his entire life inside a theatrical illusion of monarchy. As his body crumbled and his thoughts unraveled, superstition became his only constant. He begged for blessings, begged for salvation. He slept with relics tucked under his pillow. He wore protective charms under his robes. None of it made a difference, because the truth wasn't magic. It was biology. Not a demon, but a dynasty. Charles was not cursed. He was the curse. His organs shut down one by one. His skin yellowed, his legs bloated, his digestion failed. His gums bled. His hair came out in clumps. His stool turned black. His vision dimmed. Yet the court still dressed him, still placed the crown on his head, still displayed him to the world. Because if the king collapsed, the empire would follow. There he sat, silent, sagging, his mind adrift in fog. He mistook diplomats for uncles, called courtiers by names long buried, and spent hours murmuring to shadows that answered only in his head. At times, he froze mid-sentence. At others, he babbled, eyes wide with panic, like a man half dreaming and already halfway gone. But no one removed him. No one dared. There was no one else. The Spanish Habsburg line had run dry. Charles was not just dying. He was the last thread of a tapestry, worn to threads. The court watched in dread as the end approached, slower than death, faster than dignity. In a final flicker of agency, he dictated a will. But it, too, was not his own. Edits flowed from French agents, Austrian diplomats, Spanish nobles clawing for survival. Around him, Europe prepared for war, each empire ready to tear at the bones of Spain the moment his breath gave out. That breath came in 1700. He was 38, but the body on the table told a crueler truth. His heart, blackened and enlarged. His lungs, drowning. His intestines, rotting with gangrene. His testicles, shrunk, decayed, useless. His weight, barely more than a boy's. The royal blood ran thick as pitch. Even the doctors were stunned. He left no children, no legacy, no future. Only a ringing bell over a crumbling kingdom. With Charles's final breath, the dynasty turned to dust, and Europe ignited. The War of Spanish Succession unleashed a firestorm. Armies marched, cities burned, maps were rewritten in blood. Spain, once a titan, became a prize to be fought over. A battlefield, not a nation. Its king, long dead, was now just a symbol, used, discarded, forgotten. Charles had been the pawn in a game too large for his fragile hands. The war shattered generations. Gold vanished. Colonies turned restless. Foreign tongues echoed in Spanish palaces. But beneath the grand tombs of El Escorial, where cold marble glowed in candlelight, the final Habsburg lay, thin, hollow, wrapped in silk. Encased in silence, he ruled for nearly 4 decades, but left nothing. No heirs, no triumphs, only a final lesson etched in suffering. His life is remembered not for power, but for decay. A warning dressed in velvet, proof of what happens when a crown becomes an inheritance instead of a burden. Charles II was not the fall of Spain. He was the result of its fall, a living endnote to a dynasty that chose blood over breath, legacy over life. History rarely remembers kings who did nothing, but Charles is remembered, not as a tyrant, not as a conqueror, but as a consequence. He marked the close of a lineage too proud to change, too blind to survive. A family that spiraled inward, folded in on itself until there was nothing left but ritual and ruin. And at the center sat a man, shaped by centuries of silence. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't corrupt. He simply was, a fragile vessel for the sins of his ancestors. Every step, every shiver, every awkward nod under the weight of a crown that had long since become a curse, he bore it all. What makes his story so haunting isn't the sickness or the sorrow. It's the silence, the refusal to see, the golden halls that rang with lies instead of truth, the ministers who smiled, the priests who blessed, the artists who painted overwrought. Because to admit he was broken meant admitting everything was. That Spain was not eternal. That power, unchecked, does not preserve. It devours. And so Charles II sat slumped on a throne that should have been empty, while the kingdom rotted beneath his feet. This wasn't just the end of a reign. It was the implosion of an illusion. The death of a system that ran too long on pride, fear, and blood. And when the final curtain fell, all that remained was silence, and a crown with no head worthy to wear it.